Hello, my name is Charlie Sull. For the past 10 years, I've been researching the concept of cultural measurement at MIT, and over the course of that time, I have, with my co founder, developed an AI platform that measures culture using artificial intelligence. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about the best ways to measure culture. And when I go into many of the companies that I work with, the way they are measuring it is with the Likert point scale survey. And I have come to develop a pretty strong point of view that there are better ways to analyze the Likert scale survey. So even if you don't want to use a culture AI platform yet, that's okay. This video is for anyone who, for very bizarre reasons, or maybe they just work in people analytics, is interested in the Likert scale survey, specifically using it to measure organizational culture. So the question we're going to ask today, we're going to start with a pretty tangible question is, how can you benchmark culture with point scale surveys? Okay, so the question is, you have one company and you have an aspect of culture, so we call it innovation, and the question you're trying to answer is, compared to other similar companies, how is innovation going at my company? And we're going to answer this question. We're going to see how far we can get in answering this question when you're using a Likert scale, point scale survey to answer it. And then, why this question matters? Well, this question matters because benchmarking matters. If you are a very, very innovative company, that's useful information for the leader to know. And if you're a very, very uninnovative company, but perhaps your strategy needs you to be innovative, that's also information that the CEO is definitely going to want to know. So it's helpful to have a good sense of external benchmarking. And this question also matters because, as we'll see when we explore what is and what is not possible with the Likert scale survey, this actually will surface a lot deeper issues with how we measure culture. And the reason that matters is, if you can't effectively measure culture, it becomes a lot harder to manage culture, it becomes a lot harder to improve culture, and culture matters a great deal for a wide variety of organizational outcomes. So who is this video for? Who is a video about Likert scale survey design and, epistemology actually for? This is not for a wide audience. I don't expect this to go viral on TikTok or anything like that. But I think a couple of people will find this interesting. And the first group is people analytics, because they're using these Likert scale surveys every day to try to tackle some of these questions that we're going to be considering. So they're hopefully interested in this. And then the second group of people who might be interested in this are what I would term culture enthusiasts. So these are people who are just very, very interested in culture. They think about it a lot. They think about, what are the best ways to improve it? What is it? Questions like that. And if you come to the same path of culture enthusiasm as I did, you'll pretty quickly realize that key to understanding and managing culture is measuring culture. So if you have gone down this kind of rabbit hole that I've been down the past 10 years around cultural measurement, this will be very interesting to you. There are not very many people like this, but if you are like this, you will find this interesting. Okay, so let's dive into it. What is what I would call the classical approach to benchmarking, which is the approach pretty much everyone is doing right now, as far as I can see. Okay, well, you start with a Likert scale question or a point scale question, like, this company effectively innovates new products and ways of working. Okay, so this is a question about innovation. And then you have a lot of employees answering this question on a point scale. So the blue company, they're giving it mostly fives and fours, 1, 3. And the green company on the right, they have kind of lower answers. They're giving it a lot of threes and twos, and their answers are a little bit lower. Okay, and then step 2 is very easy. You just take the average of their answers, or if you want, sometimes people do the percentage favorable, unfavorable. I prefer averages, but in any case, you analyze the numbers, and the higher number wins. So in this case, it's pretty easy to see, at least according to the classical approach, that the blue company has a stronger culture of innovation because their average answer is a 4.33, and the green company's average answer is a 3.50. Okay, so this is what the classical approach to benchmarking posits. It's pretty straightforward. And again, why does this matter? Okay, so this is when you're talking about Likert scale survey design, things like that. You always have to go back to why it matters because people get very bored. But the reason it matters is because okay, say you're in this second company, and before the CEO didn't really know how innovative his company was. Maybe he had some idea. And now he's just gotten these survey results, and he's saying, "Oh wow, you're really compared to other companies, you're really uninnovative." And this is big news to the CEO because it turns out that his whole strategy for his company depends on being innovative. So this is a big piece of news to him, and he's going to do a lot of things differently. He's going to allocate resources differently. He's going to prioritize different things. He's going to move personnel around. Maybe he'll fire people, all because of this kind of insight. So that's the narrow view of why this matters. And the broader view of why this matters is, okay, so this, on first glance, this appears to be right? I mean, it's pretty hard to argue with. But if this is not the right way of analyzing this data, and this is your main mechanism for understanding the culture, then perhaps your whole understanding of culture could use some work. Yeah. So anyway, the classical cultural measurement approach assumes that okay, when these, going back to this example, when all of these employees are giving their 5s and 4s, they're going through and thinking to themselves, how is innovation going at this company? Let me consider it for a second. I'm going to give this a 5. I'm going to pay attention to this question. I'm going to give it a 5. Okay, so according to this assumption, the variance in a Likert scale survey is going to look something like this. Okay, there's going to be quite a lot of variance. You're at the first question. You're like, let me think about it for a second. I agree. Question 2, I actually disagree with this one. Question 3, let me think. I disagree. Question 4, oh well, there's a big gap. I strongly agree with that. And so on and so forth. So basically, this is going to result in pretty varied, high quality data. I mean, if you look at data like this, you'd probably think to yourself, okay, maybe there are still better ways of measuring culture than this, but this looks like it's doing a pretty good job, especially for a survey approach that was developed nearly 100 years ago. Okay, so if this was what was going on with these surveys, I would say the classical approach to benchmarking is, totally defensible. However, what we know for a fact is that this is not how employees answer these surveys. How employees answer these surveys is like this. Basically, they're going through the survey and they're answering almost every question with almost the same answer. So to put it into numbers, they're answering 67% of all questions with the same single answer and 89% of all questions with the same 2 answers. And that's the average respondent. So half of respondents will actually be answering these surveys with even less variance than what is shown on this slide. And how do we know this? Well, we're not just, coming out of this, randomly. We did a study of 900,000 Likert scale responses, and these were the results of the survey. So this is based off of nearly 1 million employees' feedback. Every single Likert scale survey I've ever seen has followed this pattern, and I strongly encourage you to go to your own company and replicate this analysis there. If you contact me, I can give you the instructions. It takes less than 20 minutes, and you can do it in Excel. But basically, what we have learned, one of the big takeaways from the past 10 years of my life, is that this is how employees answer these Likert scale surveys. They're mostly going through, you can call it autopilot. Some academics call it straight lining, going in a straight line, and answering almost every question with almost the same answer. Okay, so in our view of cultural measurement, this is a very important fact because this is very different from the assumption that the classical approach relies on. So what we think is that you can think of you're learning basically two pieces of information from every question of a Likert scale survey. So the engagement is the road, and the culture is the turns. So in any survey, the average respondent is going to go through it and answer pretty similar to this. I mean, this is the exact pattern that about 25% of survey respondents give. And what can you learn from that big driving pattern, the road? Well, that's telling you their level of engagement or satisfaction, which are pretty highly correlated constructs. Um, and that's useful information. Okay, so now you know how your employees are, how engaged they are in different parts of the organization. That's helpful. Do you need a 50-question survey to learn that? Probably not. You could probably do it with maybe 2 or 3 questions. But in any case, you're learning about engagement and satisfaction, so that's good. And then what you're learning from these deviations from the autopilot is the assessment of culture is the employee's assessment of the cultural dimension in the question. So you can think of it as the employee is, they're really the takeaway from this is that employees really don't pay that much attention to these surveys. They're going through mostly an autopilot, and they're saying, yeah, I'm pretty happy. I'm a 4 out of 5. I'm a 4 out of 5. I'm a 4 out of 5. Then suddenly they hit question 6. And this, for question 6, for whatever reason, something inside of them wakes up and they say, actually, no, that's not normal. I'm going out of my way to say that is going less well than the other questions. So from that variance from their autopilot, it's possible to determine something, I would say, that is real about how they feel about that question. Okay, so if you need a simple mnemonic, you can look at this inspirational poster that I personally have in my bedroom. Just kidding. And it's all about engagement being the road and culture being the turns. Okay, so let's go back to our original example. You have the two companies, the blue company and the green company, and they're answering this question about innovation. And just for the purposes of this discussion, imagine that these are the average answers. These are how most employees answer the question. Okay, so in the first case, you have the employees going through all these questions, and their level of autopilot is strongly agreed. They love this company. They're so highly engaged. They're giving 5s to pretty much everything, okay? So they really love it here. That's strong evidence that there's a very strong employee experience here if this is what all the employees are saying. However, when they hit that question 6 about innovation, they're going out of their way to say, like, I love this place so much. I want to work here forever. However, this one question about innovation kind of bugs me because there's this is the one thing maybe that the company isn't so good at. So what I'm going to do is go out of my way, just a little bit, but I'm going to go out of my way and give this a more negative answer than I'm giving to virtually all of my other questions, okay? So the narrative for the blue company is employee experience is fantastic, but innovation, that's the one thing, maybe there's room for improvement, okay? And then the green company is the opposite. So this company, if this is how all the employees are answering the engagement survey, it has a terrible employee experience culture. They're going through, I strongly disagree that this is going well. I strongly disagree that this is going well. I strongly disagree with all of it. However, once they get to this question about innovation, they think to themselves, okay, everything else about this company is terrible, but I've got to hand it to them. They know how to innovate. This is an innovative place. And even if they don't go up to, from a 1 to a 5, which is a very unusual jump in a Likert scale survey, they go up from a 1 to a 3, and they go out of their way to say, innovation is going well here. Okay? And you can express this mathematically. If you contact me, I'll give you the exact formula. It's incredibly simple math. The number here isn't the raw numbers. Okay, so if you're using the classical approach, the blue company gives it a 4, and the green company gives it a 3. So the blue company has a better culture of innovation than the green company. Okay, no, the kinds of numbers we want here are the variance from the average autopilot, which in the case of the blue company is a very large number of negative standard deviations, negative 2.8 standard deviations. And in the case of the green company, is a very large number of positive standard deviations, 2.8 standard deviations. Okay, so these, according to this new way of looking at it, these are the numbers we want to pay attention to when we're trying to measure culture. And according to this new approach, which, maybe I'm going crazy thinking about this, but I have thought about this a lot, this exact thought experiment. And I think that the green company in this example actually has a better culture of innovation, because those employees, they're going out of their way to say this is going well, whereas the blue company's employees are going out of their way to say this is going poorly. Okay. So that's, basically how over the years we've learned to interpret these Likert scale surveys. And at this point, you might be thinking one of two things. The first thing is, I'm crazy, I'm a heretic, the classical approach is still right, I'll live and die by the classical approach to cultural measurement. Okay, or you might be thinking, actually that what you're saying does make sense now. Actually, this explains some of the things I've thought about when I've analyzed these surveys. But even so, we can still benchmark, right? This doesn't mean these surveys are unusable. It just means you want to interpret them a different way. I would argue that both of those points are wrong, and I'll turn to the first one. So I'm crazy. The classical approach is still right. Okay. To some extent, this is a philosophical, subjective question, because we don't really know the exact intent of what these employees want to say at scale, except through their survey responses. But I will say, okay, so if you think the classical approach is still right, isn't this pretty weird? So this is a survey I pulled at random, but I've analyzed, I don't know, hundreds of Likert scale surveys, and all of them pretty much look like this. So basically, in this survey, this is a little bit of an unusual Likert scale survey in that there are 10 point scale points on it, as opposed to 5 is more usual. And it's also unusual because there are an unusually small number of questions. So there are fewer than 20 questions on this Likert scale survey, which theoretically would lead to less autopilot. However, what you really see when you analyze the data is that even beginning at, say, 15 questions, you get very high levels of autopilot, and it doesn't really change no matter how many more questions you ask. So it's kind of an unusual Likert scale survey, and you would expect there to be less variance. But even with this Likert scale survey, the vast majority of answers are within a very narrow range. So 70% of all the answers to all the questions are within 5% of the total range of the 0 to 10 point scale. And 95% of questions are within 11% of the range of the 0 to 10 point scale. Okay? So why is this? If the classical approach is right, how could this be true? Because these questions, just look at them. They're about everything ranging from work schedule to benefits, to being able to take time off, to the supervisor being fair to me, to the amount of training they're going to receive, to promotions. These very different aspects of the company. And when you have a 50-question Likert scale survey, there's even a more diverse range of topics. But what's remarkable is employees are answering all these questions within the same 5% range, or maybe the same 10% range. Isn't that kind of weird? And how else do you explain this except through autopilot and this new approach to cultural measurement? And if you are still skeptical and you think the classical approach is still right, what I would strongly encourage you to do is to test out the level of autopilot in your own survey. You can contact me. I'll send you the instructions. It takes 20 minutes. You can do it on Excel. It's very easy, and I hope to, one day change your mind, even if this video doesn't do it. So that's how I'd address the first group, and then the second group is saying, okay, this does seem to make sense, but we can still use the Likert scale surveys, right? And to this, I would say you can learn some things from a Likert scale survey, but a lot fewer than you think you might be able to. So from a typical 50-question Likert scale survey, you'll typically learn 4 things, and you'll be able to benchmark maybe 2 or 3. So it's a pretty inefficient return on investment, especially considering how long these surveys take to administer. And what I mean by this is when you look at the variance, so this is taking the average respondents, the average variance from the respondent's average answer, and these numbers are very small for the most part. So on average, the vast majority of these questions have a variance of less than, say, 0.4 standard deviations from the respondent's average answer. And why is this? Why is there so little variance in these surveys? Well, it goes back to exactly how these respondents are answering them, where they're answering almost every question with almost the same answer. So really, when you're trying to do this, because you would think, okay, benchmarking, it's easy. You just take the two standard deviations and you subtract one from another. Theoretically, yes, and sometimes that does work. But more often than not, when you try to benchmark these topics by taking one standard deviation, call it negative 0.2 standard deviations, and then subtracting another one, call it call it 0.1 standard deviation, you get a result like negative 0.3 standard deviations. And who is going to advise a CEO based off of negative 0.3 standard deviations? You have to look really hard to find a variance that small. So in practice, I encourage you to play around with this with your own survey data. You might learn some interesting insights. But what I found in practice, it all comes down to this level of autopilot, which then manifests in a lack of variance at the aggregate level, and makes it very difficult to do benchmarking comparisons effectively. And the implications for this are not just external benchmarking, which was the original question, but also internal benchmarking. So how do different parts of the company compare to one another culturally? That's a pretty helpful question to have answered, right? But it's quite difficult with the Likert scale, approach, as well as over time comparisons, because then it's the same basic idea. You're just comparing two different populations, one of them in December, one of them in April, and the same rules apply. Also, Likert scales, they will give you a couple of insights, but they'll be mostly based on the employee experience. And the reason for that is because when employees do wake up from their autopilot, the main reason they're going to wake up is because of things that deeply impact them on a personal level. Like, say that they have a boss who's exhibiting toxic behavior, and they really care about that. So when that question comes up on the survey, they wake up and they say, "Oh, I actually really hate this." So most of those kind of wake-up questions are going to be due to things that have a strong impact on the employee experience. And it's going to be quite unusual if you're trying to measure a lot of these things that are relevant for what we would call strategic culture. So if you're trying to measure things like execution or cross-unit collaboration, agility, for instance, these things generally don't have that big of an impact on the employee experience, so they're not going to be very likely to be picked up on an engagement survey. And for all those reasons, to measure culture more effectively, we would say you need a new instrument, okay? So what we've spent the past 10 years working on at CultureX, and the research came from MIT, is culture AI. So the way this works is actually very simple. Instead of understanding culture based on a Likert scale approach, which is still by far the most common way that people do it, and they usually use the classical interpretation, which I'd caution them against. But with AI, you're analyzing natural language. So when we say AI, this is what we mean. It means you're analyzing the natural language. And when you consider that natural language, it's things like, they encourage the founder mentality and we move like there's a fire under our butts, but our CRO does not tolerate dissent. It's like walking on eggshells. Okay, that's actually pretty complicated language if you don't have a background in organizational culture. And it turns out employees will use things like slang, jargon, idioms, and all other sorts of non-vanilla language when they're discussing their company. So the next step is you have to have an AI that is trained to understand culture and how to detect in language. And this is difficult. I mean, this is a lot more difficult than doing a Likert scale survey, although you get much better results. And there are various ways of doing this. I mean, if you're interested, you can contact me. We can talk about how I did it. If you're starting from this scratch today, I'd imagine you're probably going to use mostly a large language model approach. There are different ways of doing it, but at the end of the day, the AI has to learn how culture works and how to detect it in language. And this is the mark of a good culture AI. It's how smart it is, it's how educated it is, and it's how strong the thought leadership that went into designing the culture AI is. And the output is actually very simple. So at least in this version that we did, I mean, you could make this a little bit more complex, but basically this is just doing two things. One of them is saying, is she speaking positively or negatively about the topic? Okay, just using sentiment analysis, which thanks to LLMs is mostly a solved problem right now, which is great. And the second thing, which is not a solved problem by LLMs, is topical analysis. Okay, so this is how smart the machine is. Basically, is the machine able to take a sentence like "we move like there is fire under our butts" and accurately classify that into speed? Okay, so a sophisticated AI. Culture AI platform is going to have hundreds of these topics, hopefully grounded in evidence, and will be able to understand basically anything that employees speak about when they speak about their company. So the benefits of culture AI, which we, having thought about this for a long time, we think is really the only solution to more effective cultural measurement. You can't get really very useful insights, or at least not very many of them, from the traditional Likert scale approach. One of them is no autopilot. Okay, so this is actually, as we've just explored, this is the single biggest barrier to effective cultural measurement using the Likert scale approach. But with culture AI, employees will say something. Maybe they'll say something very terse. You'll ask them, what do you want to change about the company? They'll say more pay. Okay, so it's two words, very terse. Nevertheless, they could have been speaking about cross-unit collaboration. They could have been speaking about empowerment. They could have been speaking about benefits. They could have been speaking about speed. They could have been speaking about hundreds of other things. There's a lot of information in that they consciously said, what I would like more of is pay. Okay, so there's a really rich information there. It's impossible when employees go on natural language, unless they're writing in their sleep, for them to go on autopilot. So that's a huge methodological win for culture AI. The second point is actually maybe even more profound than this. Okay, so this is kind of more of a thought exercise. But say you're an employee and you have a message that you desperately want to get across to management. And in your view, this message is incredibly important to deliver. It's not only the biggest thing you hate about this company that's actually going to cause you to quit in a few weeks if this isn't resolved. It's also what you think is holding the company back from achieving its strategy and winning in the market. And your message is, my boss is micromanaging me and it's driving me insane. That is the message, that is your voice that you really want to convey to leadership. Okay? And then your mechanism that leadership gives you for conveying this message is a survey that looks like this. Okay? It's a classic, I don't even know how long it's a 60-question engagement survey. And you fill it in, and okay, there is a question maybe about micromanagement in this long survey, and you fill that in negatively. And there's a question about your boss, or maybe a couple of questions that you fill in negatively. Nevertheless, when faced with survey results like this, it is impossible, there's no way to do this, it is impossible for the analyst on the other end of the survey to decipher the original message that the employee was trying to say. Okay? And that in itself is a big advantage of culture AI, because with culture AI, the employee just says in natural language, my boss is micromanaging me, it's driving me crazy. The culture AI says, okay, I understand exactly what you're saying, and the message is able to be conveyed to leadership. Another big benefit of culture AI is context and actionable suggestions. So here you're dealing with natural language, not just numbers. So at the end of the day, the Likert scale survey is going to give you a number. I would argue that it's often an unreliable number unless you know the right way to interpret that data. But in any case, it's a number. Whereas with employee natural language, they're not only telling you what the problem is, a lot of the time they're going out of their way to describe that problem and tell you how to fix it. They're trying their hardest to convey this information to you because they want this problem fixed. So it makes it a lot easier to come up with an actionable solution. Strategic as well as employee experience culture. This is what I mentioned before. So with the traditional Likert scale survey, you're probably not going to get that many insights, and the ones that you do get are probably going to be related to the employee experience. So things that really touch a nerve with employees and affect their experience. With Culture AI, you'll also learn about things like agility, execution, cross-unit collaboration, processes, and a lot of other things that generally don't have that big of an impact on the employee experience. But nevertheless, if you're a CEO, you're trying to execute a new strategy that depends on cross-unit collaboration. You definitely want to know about that. Another advantage of Culture AI is you can synthesize data sets a lot more easily because everyone is writing in natural human language in different data sets. With Likert scale surveys, the questions have to be, pretty much identical for you to be able to make any kind of comparison. And then actually making the comparison is quite difficult. And then finally, with Culture AI, you can just get rid of those, 50 question engagement surveys. They take 20 minutes. You can just ask a question, what would you change about the company? That's a perfectly good survey. It takes them a minute or two to fill out, more if they want. And you learn a lot more information. So that's a brief overview of why we think that Culture AI is a better solution than these Likert scale surveys for measuring culture. If you'd like to talk about any of these points, as I mentioned, I'm kind of a strange person who has thought about these issues for a very long time. If you are unusually like me, interested in these points, or you'd like to do things like measure autopilot in your own company, or just talk about how do you build a Culture AI platform, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's my email address. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have found this helpful.